Hey guys, thank you so much for joining me in another video. So as you can tell, based on the title, we are talking about the handbags of New Celine. So when we say New Celine, we are specifically talking about the HEDI Slimane era handbags. When we often say old Celine, we mean Phoebe Philo era. Of course, there's been others before them. Michael Kors was the creative director at Celine. Then there was the creator of the line, Celine Vipiana. When we specifically say New Celine, we are talking about the HEDI era. I did a whole video on Phoebe Philo, so if you're like, where's that? I got you. We have Phoebe Philo covered. I just want to talk about it because frankly, I just got this bag and I've just been kind of obsessed with it. After getting my new Celine bag, I really feel very inspired by this era of Celine. So in today's video, we're going to talk about, much like other videos, sort of like the three bags that I feel are defining the brand now as in 2022, December 2022. And I also kind of want to talk about three sort of definitive things that define HEDI's style, what makes New Celine New Celine. So let's get into it. So in terms of who HEDI is, you probably know him, but if you don't, he is largely responsible for popularizing that drain pipe, like skinny jean aesthetic. It became like a really sexy thing in the 2000s, 2010s. It was really him that redefined the silhouette, and especially for men. Of course, he did not create the skinny jean. You can look way back into history. I think if we want to just look at this in terms of normalizing and making skinny look high fashion, it really was him. Just a little bit about his history. He started at YSL Menswear in 1996 as the men's ready-to-wear director, and then he eventually became the artistic director. And at his first run at Saint Laurent, he was very interested, not so much like copying Yves Saint Laurent, the designer. Like if you look at some of his early stuff, it is so different than like Yves Saint Laurent. He was never interested in creating Yves Saint Laurent in sort of like this one-to-one way, but sort of like capturing the essence of Yves Saint Laurent, thinking about fashion in a very forward way. One thing Yves Saint Laurent did that was really, really iconic was the bending of genders in fashion, making women look powerful. And I think HEDI also was very much interested in looking at gender, or like looking at how men could be viewed in a different way, kind of changing the narrative around what sexiness was. He, in 2001, left YSL. He was offered the creative directorship at Jil Sander, which he declined, and took on the role as menswear creative director at Dior. But I always thought that was very interesting because to me, Jil Sander was always someone that was very much, I don't want to use the word minimalism, but it was very much about making fashion in this pure, very streamlined way. And you definitely saw that with HEDI's like slimmer cuts, the interest in like forward silhouettes for that time. I can definitely see why he was asked, but he then took on the role at Dior as the menswear creative director. While he didn't necessarily invent skinny jeans, him being at this role at probably one of the most luxurious brands of that time, still of the time, right? Like he had the budget, he had the marketing, he had the ability to really let his vision show. I don't know if you guys remember this, so I'm 32. In the early 2000s, right? Y2K era, the concept of the attractive man was Backstreet Boys or Calvin Klein, muscular, like really like beefy, muscular guy. Like in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, there really was this definitive shift between what was so-called socially attractive, right? Obviously that's a subjective thing, but what became in fashion in terms of the physique and what was attractive. Apparently like Karl Lagerfeld lost a bunch of weight because he wanted to wear his clothes. Changing what was conventionally attractive for men through fashion. Of course, there were all these other forces, right? Like what was going on in music and youth culture was obviously affecting this. Him making this the vibe at Dior, making this at Dior like this ultra luxurious like menswear line. It was sexy to look like you were a young Rolling Stone. That was the look. What was also so interesting about his work was it also appealed to women. You had women like Madonna, Nicole Kidman. His clothing was so slim, so slender, women could fit into it easily. The fact that the lines between what clothing could be worn by like genders, when you look at a lot of the models, they look like they could be men or women. With HEDI, the lines blurred. What became attractive as a man totally changed. And that's why he became super popular with musicians. He has stated music has always been a huge impact. As a young boy, he was always bullied for his own very slim, slender physique, but he would look to people like David Bowie. And then in 2007, he left Dior, had like this period of doing like purely photography, and then he got back into the game. 2012, joined YSL. We know like the SLP aesthetic, it's pretty recent, so we understand that kind of very like super skinny, kind of that like indie rock, indie look that I think he really owned in during like his YSL years. And then left YSL 2016. 2019 debuted his first spring summer collection, and here we are. And so when we talk about his handbags at Celine, the first bag he ever created, I feel was such a like olive branch to the old Celine women, and I'm talking about the 16 bag. So the 16 bag was the first bag that he ever designed. Apparently the story is he designed it on his first day as the creative director, and the name itself refers to the Hotel Colbert at 16 Rue Vivienne. So this is the address of Celine's headquarters. While he got a lot of flack for really just changing the brand from what it was under Phoebe Philo, when I look at this bag, I don't think it's a huge departure from the luggage bag. When you kind of think about the pieces of leather that kind of curve, it's kind of like a work tote. It's something that you can wear in like a work appropriate kind of setting, but it's also very elegant. But when I saw people like Angelina Jolie wear this bag, to me, I think she's kind of that midpoint between the Phoebe Philo era and new Celine and old Celine. You can tell she loves her old Celine. There's this like elegance, maturity about Angelina, but there's also a little bit of like an edginess to her. I don't want to call it like rock and roll, but there is sort of this femme fatale edginess about Angelina Jolie that sort of speaks to Eddie's aesthetic. Her wearing this bag, I think, totally works. We also saw people like Lady Gaga wear this bag. He's worked with Lady Gaga in the past. I think her being sort of someone that wears his bags very frequently makes sense. More recently, I've seen sort of a surge in this bag on social media, and I think it's largely because of Lisa, you know, the K-pop singer. She's been wearing this bag, and it's in the mini size, and I think in that size it just looks so cute. It looks so adorable. It feels very fresh and new. And I think when we're talking about the influences of Eddie throughout his whole career, from his first run at YSL to Dior Men's to Saint Laurent to Celine now, it is always about the music culture, what is happening in music that is inspiring him. When you look at who's at the front row at the Dior Men's show, it's people like Elton John to Yoko Ono to whatever like musicians that are trending at the time. And then you see today K-pop celebrities to indie rockers to really like random obscure bands. Music is at the heart and soul of Eddie's work. When we talk about vibes, I feel we throw this word around, but I totally feel when I look at his collections, I feel music. Whether it's like his last collection, like this indie rock, like 2004 indie girl, to if he's going for a 70s look, you feel that era of music. And often like musicians are the ones like fronting his campaigns. You see this all the time, right? Like he's not the first to do this. You see these big fashion houses using musician celebrities. But I think there is something a little bit more authentic or like sincere, because I feel he really does capture that style of that musician and vice versa. He himself is a music photographer. His work was recently featured. There's a recent documentary called Meet Me in the Bathroom, which is about sort of the indie rock music scene. On to bag number 2, and this is a bag I just am so obsessed with, and I'm talking about the Celine Ava bag. This bag has been really popularized by Lisa, but someone else who I've seen wear this bag very heavily, and she's kind of a Celine sort of muse, is Kaia Gerber. This bag feels very much like that like effortless, that girl, clean girl aesthetic, almost that look that Kaia Gerber has perfected in a way. She's flawless, right? Like she doesn't need to wear makeup, very minimal, clean look. Her style is just very casual but effortless at the same time. I imagine if your mother Cindy Crawford, you learn a thing or two about style. And I think this kind of influence of what the younger generation is doing, this sort of youth generation, it kind of goes hand in hand with like the music inspiration. The second like major influence on new Celine is youth culture. What is it that the youth are doing? He definitely takes inspiration from online culture. And I feel especially a lot of the collections during pandemic that were sort of like these like films, even like the men's stuff. I find the men's stuff so fascinating. fascinating. You can see there are elements of that e-boy aesthetic, that like gamer look in the menswear line, and then on the flip side it's kind of that Parisian clean girl aesthetic. I remember seeing an article, Eddie's work, or like new Celine, is the fashion equivalent of Botox because of how inspired he is by youth culture, streetwear, what 19-year-olds are wearing on the streets of Paris. What are guys in California at like the skate park wearing? There's definitely inspiration from those kinds of places. This approach really does contrast to what Phoebe Philo did at Celine. Phoebe Philo was so interested in the modern woman today. There was almost sort of this embrace of like maturity, but it was just sort of an appreciation for the modern woman, whereas new Celine is not really interested in that. The thing about Celine, while there is like inspiration from youth culture, you can wear it if you're in your 20s, but you can also be like me and be in your 30s and wear it, can be in your 40s and wear it. Like there really is like an agelessness. And so for handbag number 3, it's my latest acquisition, which I've talked about ad nauseum, but it is the Celine Triomphe. So this bag initially came out it was like the crossbody variation. It first was shown on the runways 2019 in beautiful exotics, but it really did remind me of the classic bag, but with the Triomphe, but also has come out with like the shoulder bag variation and has also come out with like a top handle variation. You see sort of like this Triomphe motif used often in other clothing pieces to other accessories. I think this makes sense. If you look at old vintage Celine, like if you look at like Japanese markets, it's definitely a motif that is a signature for the house. This is something else Eddie often wrongly gets criticized for, is his inability to respect the house codes. I understand there's some critics that have sort of a bone to pick with him. I don't think that's a fair assessment. I think he's very much inspired by the history of Celine. He, as sort of like this Parisian designer himself, he is able to like capture this aesthetic in a very authentic way. This kind of leads me to like third point. I think Celine embodies, I'm gonna go back to like Yves Saint Laurent's concept of rive gauche fashion. There is what's called left bank versus right bank in Paris, but like the right bank is just kind of where the city center, where there's like the commerce, finance kind of side of things, sort of the elites there, and then you have the left bank, and what's on the left side, and it's more sort of like the creative, the locals, the students, just sort of like the everyday Parisians. What he is really trying to capture with new Celine is left bank Parisian style. Yves Saint Laurent was someone that actually also captured this. Yves Saint Laurent did something that was quite opposite to what he was doing, and he opened a ready-to-wear boutique in Paris called Saint Laurent Rive Gauche in an antique store. It was in this very student-dominated, it was not a fancy, wealthy area. It was such a contrast to his really extravagant couture pieces and sort of this concept of ready to wear, something that seems so basic now. This is what a lot of people criticize Eddie for, is he makes commercial fashion. I think what he is doing is essentially capturing this sort of approach to fashion that is rive gauche, very like left bank Parisian fashion, whereas you may not necessarily be able to wear like a Picasso inspired dress. That is art. This kind of leads me to my conclusion here. Eddie really does get a bad rap, and I think a very uncharitable way, for being what is described as commercial, ready to wear. I think for many there is this longing for fashion to be avant-garde and groundbreaking, almost more on the spectrum of wearable art or art. There's this dichotomy, is fashion art or is it design? I think a lot of people want fashion to be art. You know, there's something special about when like the new collections come out and you get to see all the work from the designers, but then when you see new Celine, it's like commercial products. It's not art. It's not avant-garde. There's nothing necessarily groundbreaking or anything that sort of like is challenging society or is like a cultural critique. And I think there's this critique. This is stuff that you could potentially buy at Zara. I would say to that, you could buy a lot of stuff at Zara. You can buy Chanel at Zara. You can buy Bottega at Zara. Like not actual like dupes is what I'm talking about, right? The critique of commercial fashion is that it's very dupeable. It's very easy to duplicate. Even the most expensive handbags in the world, you can find dupes of Birkins and Kellys. And I think for a lot of people, it's almost like fashion should be like art. Fashion should be wearable art, should be its own unique thing that cannot be replicated. It is its own entity. I get where people are coming from when they make this point, but for me, first and foremost, like order of operations, guys, fashion is design for me. And if you haven't watched my video where I talked about what is supposedly good design, I did a video on like Tawny Goodman style, and we talk about like Dieter Rams in that video. To me, I am most interested in that. I can watch a Balenciaga collection and like look at it and be like, oh yeah, that's like a critique of capitalism, or this is sort of this dystopian view of society or whatever, and oh cool, like a handbag that is like a boot or something. For me, I look at fashion from a consumer perspective. Even like Phoebe Philo was extremely commercial. To me, the designers that are able to like thread the needle between creating something that is like aesthetic but is also good design is, to me, the dream. It's just ultimately what Dieter Rams wants in fashion. Like, good design is aesthetic, good design is useful, good design is honest, good design is thorough to the last detail. The list goes on. To me, I look at design, and for some people they might be like, oh, like Celine has like a leather jacket. You can get a leather jacket at Zara. Yeah, I know you can. Just the way you can buy a white t-shirt from Zara, or you could spend $500 on a white t-shirt, but you spend $500 because of the quality, the materials, the craftsmanship, just the way you spend $10,000, $20,000 on bags from Hermes. And maybe I'm like super basic. I like fashion that is design heavy, so be it. I'm just living in my reality. If I was someone that was a celebrity going to Met Galas, I might have a different take and I might be wearing Balenciaga or something like that. I don't know. I would not wear Balenciaga if I was a celebrity. I'd probably still want to wear the row. I think when it comes to this critique of fashion, of like commercialism versus avant-garde, it just ultimately comes down to what we expect from fashion and what we want. Do we want a spectacle we can enjoy? We can watch the spring summer collections and the fall winter collections. We have those seasons to look forward to, and we can enjoy the spectacle and the beauty and the production, the fantasy of fashion. Or can we allow fashion be the everyday? Like, you know, the kinds of videos that are what people are wearing in New York, what people are wearing in Paris or whatever, versus celebrity red carpet moments. Seeing how the everyday person styles their clothes in New York in this very eclectic, eccentric way is more interesting to me. I'll say I'm basic, I guess, like is probably what people would say for liking stuff like this. I'm wearing a Saint Laurent blazer, guys, super basic. The reality is I'm a 32-year-old mom that really likes fashion. Normies like me deserve to enjoy fashion. That's not to say I don't also wear Vivienne Westwood or Margiela. I wear that as well, but I also in my everyday, like, this is appropriate. So anyways, that is my video. Would love to know your thoughts on new Celine. Thank you so much for joining, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.